Hi everyone, it's Roxanne here to talk to you all about Dysconcious Racism by Joyce E. and Race, Class, and Gender by Bonnie Thornton Dill. So framing this conversation, thinking about feminism and education, some things that I'd like to talk to you about. One of the main topics was the application of the concept of sisterhood. So this is kind of obviously a really interesting topic. Something for me, I think it kind of helps me understand why I feel like sometimes African American women don't like me. Before reading this, in some ways I thought like, oh, maybe we share some of the same struggles, right, as women. And Dill refers to sisterhood as a place that's supportive and a nurturing bond um, between people who have a perceived shared oppression. And that was her quoting from Elizabeth Fox Genovese. But something that obviously comes to light in reading this article is that women do not share, right, the same struggles across gender lines, especially when white women have had more power over time. And so it's really interesting to see the ways in which I interact in society, right, as opposed to how women of color react to society or how society reacts to them. So some of the themes that we see is sisterhood, right? And so sisterhood could be seen as the reproduction roles and shared lived experiences, where the feminist movement is more recently focusing on political and economic advances. So, you could say, well, women share, right, the burden of the giving birth, of being the nurturing one, of taking care of children. So maybe we should have some shared agreeing or an allyship um, of mutual goals. But upon reading the article and, everything that we've been talking about too, just kind of understanding that Black women still have a distrust, especially white people, white women, because they have not historically been allies. The article talks about even the suffragists, that they would rather align themselves with Black men before agreeing to lower themselves to a status they thought that Black women held. So they said, well, we would rather get the vote for white women, even if it means Black women can't, right? So that was like big red flags still going on today. The issues that white women may think are really important, right? Especially if you consider privileges that come with being white, like being able to advance in a class system at a faster rate, right? So we see this in reference to African American women who may not fall in the middle class, right? And so therefore have automatically different desires, needs, wants, and struggles, especially in relation to feminism. So feminism for white women, or especially women who are in the middle class or above middle class, right, is like a bourgeoisie feminism. So it doesn't bring everyone up, that it just kind of only brings up those who are already in a position, right, in that middle class or upper range already. So it's like white women saying, oh, we'll fight for all women's rights, but really the rights that they're fighting for are not universal, right? Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you have the exact same needs as the woman next to you. And we see this especially with African American women. So some of the importance as well that the article mentions is ways in which women perceive their role in society, right? So some white women may feel more entitled to certain situations. They may feel more entitled to fighting for not just being a housewife and gaining political power and access to education, where African American women have been struggling to be treated in a human way, right? So maybe even like working at home and not having to work outside the home would be seen as a luxury. So I think that just kind of points out like the differences in feminist movement, right? Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that the things that you are fighting for that are important to you are going to be exactly the same or even remotely similar to someone else fighting for rights. Something I thought was interesting was just thinking about how in America, right, Black women have always worked. It was never, there was never that separation between, right, the domestic life and then the working life. It was like the two were always commingled. Where white women have historically been relegated to just the domestic, right? You don't leave the home, don't go out and work. And if you did, it was more for like a local, maybe even just your own farm, right, or something nearby, not working for someone else's benefit. So working as a collective to fight for Black liberation has meant that all Black people are part of this oppression, right? Where white women have not been a part of this oppression because they were not oppressed by white people, or white people were not oppressed by Black people. So that shared experience of oppression ties Black people closer together than maybe a white woman and a Black woman. Thornton Dill explains that about the white women suffragists, that they kind of, left Black women in the dust and said, oh, well, there's a faction, right, that was known for espousing racist beliefs. And so how can you fight for women's rights when you're being a bigot? So things like white women were worrying about the length of their workday or professional or education discrimination. But Black women were trying to make sure that they had enough food, right, that they could take care of their family, that they had privacy, right, to keep their family together. And especially making less than white men and white women who were able to work outside the home, right? They were kept out of certain jobs even. So this is how Dill refers to a racial caste pattern of domestic work. She says that Black women couldn't work at banks. They couldn't even sweep at banks. The main area of employment was domestic. And this was something that was, continued by white women, right? They were like, oh, I'll hire a Black woman. And so she still maintains that like level of power over someone else. So from the reading, I'm understanding policies and practices that can promote empowerment and social justice, especially in education. I think understanding the past practices and policies help us understand like where equity is missing. And if we just kind of ignore the past and say all women are the same, there's a sisterhood, then we're negating the parts that actually are different. And it's coming from a white, Western, middle-class point of view. And that doesn't really represent 50% of this country, right? All the women in the nation. I'm also able to look at the feminist policies, kind of seeing the differences between postmodern feminism and difference feminism. So difference feminism states that there's a false universality, right, of all the claims and all the things that women want. That mostly feminism has been through the lens of white, Western, heterosexual, middle-class women. So looking at like postmodern feminism, we see this desire to kind of pay more attention to what different women, what oppression they might have experienced, or what they're currently experiencing. Whereas liberal feminism kind of brings you more to the Dysconcious Racism article. So in the Dysconcious Racism, understanding that that dysconscious means like an impaired sense of what racism is. So maybe someone acknowledges like, oh, Black people have historically been prejudiced against, but they think that that prejudice is due to poverty or due to Black people stereotype XYZ. So understanding that dysconscious racism is actually just kind of like cognitive dissonance, saying, oh, it exists, but not understanding like why and what we can do to change it. So in Dysconcious Racism, white people believe that black people are inferior due to reasons that seem out of their control, right? But sort of not paying attention to the history of slavery in our country, and how those effects still affect our society today. So I hope that you've enjoyed my synopsis, and I look forward to hearing any of your ideas or opinions. This is kind of affects me in the way I interact with my daughter. So I have a 17-year-old foster daughter who is African American. Actually, she says she's black because she's never been to Africa. And so just trying to understand, sometimes I think that she and I should have a shared sisterhood, because we are women. But, these articles bring to light that just because we're women doesn't mean that we have a similar sense of how we should act, how people should treat us, how we should treat others, because we do have different experiences of how we exist in our worlds. Thanks for listening. Bye.